The church bells of Cedar Falls were supposed to ring for Martha Helena Whitmore on that crisp October morning in 1952. Instead, they fell silent as the entire congregation watched her groom disappear into the Montana wilderness, leaving behind only a hastily scrawled note and the echo of his horse's hooves on cobblestone. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra, special for you. What happened next would become the most talked-about love story in 3 counties, a tale of heartbreak, unexpected courage, and a drifter named Cole Brennan, who had nothing to offer but the shirt on his back and a heart bigger than the sky itself. Martha Helena had always been the kind of woman who planned everything down to the last detail. At 28, she ran the most successful general store in Cedar Falls, could balance books faster than most men could count to 10, and had every reason to believe her life was unfolding exactly as it should. Her first husband, Thomas, had died in the war 3 years prior, leaving her with enough life insurance money to keep the store running and a reputation as the town's most eligible widow. When railroad executive Harrison Blackwood arrived in Cedar Falls that spring, wearing his expensive suits and talking about expansion plans that would put their little Montana town on the map, Martha saw what everyone else saw: security, respectability, and a chance to build something lasting. Harrison was everything a practical woman could want: established, wealthy, and charming enough to make the other ladies at church envious. Their courtship had been proper and predictable. Sunday dinners at the hotel, evening walks past the railroad depot, where Harrison would point out improvements he planned to make, and careful conversations about their future together. Martha appreciated his methodical approach to romance. After the chaos of losing Thomas, Harrison's stability felt like solid ground beneath her feet. The wedding preparations consumed the entire town for months. Mrs. Eleanor Fitzgerald, the banker's wife, insisted on organizing the reception. The Methodist church was decorated with late-season wildflowers, and Martha's wedding dress, a cream-colored silk creation that had belonged to her grandmother, hung in her bedroom like a promise of better days ahead. Harrison had seemed nervous the week before the wedding, but Martha attributed it to normal pre-wedding jitters. He'd been spending more time at the railroad office, working late into the evenings on what he called important business matters. When she'd asked about their honeymoon plans, he'd been vague, mentioning something about needing to handle affairs. In Denver first, the morning of October 15th dawned clear and cold. Martha woke before sunrise, her stomach fluttering with anticipation. She'd laid out everything the night before: her dress, her mother's pearl necklace, the small bouquet of autumn roses that Harrison had specially ordered for her. As she prepared breakfast, she imagined how different her mornings would be as Mrs. Harrison Blackwood, living in the big house he'd promised to build on the hill overlooking town. By 9 o'clock, Martha was dressed and ready, her hair pinned, up in the elaborate style that had taken her friend Sarah 2 hours to perfect the previous evening. The church bells began their call to worship, and she could hear wagons and carriages arriving outside. Through her window, she watched families in their Sunday best making their way toward the Methodist church, their faces bright with excitement. At 9:30, young Timothy Crawford knocked on her door, his face flushed from running. "Miss Martha," he panted, "Mr. Blackwood asked me to give you this." He thrust a folded piece of paper into her hands and disappeared before she could ask any questions. The note was brief, written in Harrison's careful script. "Martha, I cannot go through with this. Business complications require my immediate departure. You deserve better than what I can offer. Please forgive me. HB." Martha read the words 3 times before their meaning sank in. Outside, the church bells continued their joyful ringing, oblivious to the fact that there would be no wedding to celebrate. She sank into her kitchen chair, still holding the note, her wedding dress rustling around her like fallen leaves. The sound of horses outside drew her to the window. Harrison's carriage was nowhere to be seen, but she could make out a dust cloud on the eastern road leading out of town. He was already gone, leaving her to face the congregation, the gossip, and the crushing weight of public humiliation. Sarah Murphy arrived 20 minutes later, breathless and concerned. "Martha, honey, people are starting to wonder where Harrison is. The preacher's been waiting, and folks are getting restless." She stopped short when she saw Martha's face. "What's happened?" Martha handed her the note without a word. Sarah's expression shifted from confusion to outrage as she read. "That coward," she whispered, "that absolute coward. How dare he do this to you?" The next hour passed in a blur of difficult decisions. Someone had to tell the congregation. Someone had to explain to the ladies who'd spent all morning preparing the reception that there would be no celebration. Someone had to face the whispers and the pitying looks and the questions that would follow Martha for months to come. But Martha Helena Whitmore had survived her husband's death and built a business from nothing. She squared her shoulders, lifted her chin, and walked to the church in her wedding dress to deliver the news herself. The congregation fell silent as she entered through the back doors, her silk skirts sweeping against the wooden pews. Every face turned toward her, some shocked, some sympathetic, others already calculating how quickly they could spread the news. Reverend Morrison stood at the altar, his expression grave with understanding. "Friends," Martha said, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed sanctuary, "there will be no wedding today. Mr. Blackwood has been called away on urgent business matters." The lie came easily, protecting what little dignity she could salvage. From the situation, the murmur that followed her announcement grew into a buzz of conversation as people began to grasp what had really happened. Martha turned and walked back down the aisle, her head high, ignoring the stares and whispered comments that followed her retreat. Outside the church, she nearly collided with a man she'd never seen before, tall and lean, with sun-weathered skin and clothes that had seen better days. He was leading a tired-looking horse and appeared to have been traveling for some time. His hat was pushed back, revealing dark hair and eyes the color of storm clouds. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat respectfully. "I couldn't help but notice the commotion. Are you all right?" Martha stared at him, this stranger who had the audacity to show concern when everyone she'd known for years was too busy gossiping to check on her welfare. "I'm perfectly fine," she said, though her voice shook slightly. The man studied her face with unsettling directness. "Begging your pardon, but you don't look fine. You look like someone who's just had her world turned upside down." There was something in his tone, not pity but genuine understanding, that nearly undid her carefully maintained composure. "I don't believe we've been introduced," she said stiffly. "Cole Brennan," he said simply. "Just passing through on my way to nowhere in particular." He glanced at the church, where people were still filing out in confused clusters. "Seems like I picked an interesting day to ride into town." Martha looked at this stranger, this Cole Brennan with his worn boots and kind eyes, and felt something shift inside her chest. Here was a man who owned nothing, promised nothing, and yet offered more genuine concern than the man who was supposed to have become her husband. "Yes," she said quietly, "it certainly has been an interesting day." Cole Brennan had been riding for 3 weeks straight, sleeping under stars and washing in creek water, when he spotted the steeple of Cedar Falls rising from the valley below. His horse, a sturdy mare named Dakota, was as tired as he was, and the prospect of a hot meal and a real bed seemed like heaven itself. What he hadn't expected was to ride into the middle of what looked like the town's biggest social disaster in years. The sight of the woman in the wedding dress, her face pale, but determined, her spine straight as a rifle barrel, stopped him cold. He'd seen that look before, on his own mother's face the day his father walked out, leaving nothing but debts and broken promises. It was the look of someone who'd been knocked down but refused to stay there. "I should probably move along," Cole said, though something in Martha's eyes made him reluctant to leave. "Don't want to intrude on private matters." "Private?" Martha let out a bitter laugh. "Mr. Brennan, I just announced to half the county that my wedding has been cancelled. Privacy is a luxury I no longer possess." Cole glanced around at the clusters of townspeople who were clearly discussing the morning's events with great enthusiasm. "Folks do love their gossip," he observed, "especially in small towns." "Indeed they do." Martha's voice carried a weariness that went deeper than mere exhaustion. "By sundown, every person within 50 miles will know that Martha Whitmore was jilted at the altar by the railroad man. Something in the way she said it, matter of fact but wounded, stirred an unexpected protectiveness in Cole. He'd been drifting from town to town for the better part of 2 years, never staying long enough to care about anyone's troubles. But this woman, standing in her wedding finery, with her chin raised against the world's judgment, deserved better than to face this alone. "Well then," he said, making a decision that would change both their lives. Maybe they should have something else to talk about. Before Martha could ask what he meant, Cole stepped closer and offered her his arm. "Would you do me the honor of accompanying me to breakfast, Miss Whitmore?" she corrected automatically. "And I hardly think Miss Whitmore," Cole continued smoothly. "I've been riding since before dawn, and I'm about to fall over from hunger. It would be a kindness if you'd join me, unless, of course, you'd prefer to stand here while they all stare and whisper." Martha looked around at the lingering crowd, then back at this stranger who was offering her an escape from their scrutiny. It was highly improper, of course. She barely knew him, and accepting his invitation would only fuel more gossip. But the alternative was returning to her empty house to sit alone with her humiliation, and that seemed far worse than any scandal she might create. "Very well, Mr. Brennan," she said, taking his offered arm. "I suppose I could use some coffee. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us." Now back to the story. The walk to Murphy's Cafe took them past the heart of Cedar Falls business district. Cole noticed how Martha nodded politely to everyone they encountered, maintaining her dignity despite the curious stares and hastily whispered conversations that followed in their wake. She was tougher than she looked, this woman in silk and pearls who'd just been publicly abandoned. Murphy's Cafe was owned by Sarah's uncle, Patrick Murphy, an Irishman who'd come west during the gold rush and stayed to feed hungry travelers. The cafe was nearly empty when they arrived. Most of the town was still outside the church, dissecting the morning's drama, which suited Martha perfectly. Patrick looked up from wiping down tables as they entered, his weathered face creasing with concern when he saw Martha's wedding dress. "Ah, lass," he said gently, "what's happened here?" "A change of plans, Mr. Murphy," Martha replied with forced lightness. "Mr. Brennan here was kind enough to invite me for coffee." Patrick's sharp eyes assessed Cole, taking in the dusty clothes and worn boots, the way he held himself with quiet confidence despite his obvious lack of means. "Any friend of Miss Martha's is welcome," he said finally. "Take any table you like." They settled into a corner booth, away from the windows and prying eyes. Patrick brought coffee without being asked, along with plates of eggs, bacon, and fresh biscuits that made Cole's stomach growl audibly. "When did you last eat?" Martha asked, noticing how quickly he attacked the food. "Yesterday morning, I think," Cole admitted between bites. "Maybe the day before. Time sort of blurs together on the trail." "The trail to where?" Cole paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. It was a simple question, but one he'd been avoiding asking himself for months. "Nowhere in particular," he said finally. "Just away from where I was." Martha studied his face, noting the careful way he'd answered. "Running from something or to something. Haven't figured out which yet." Cole met her gaze directly. What about you? Besides this morning's unpleasantness, what keeps you in Cedar Falls? Martha gestured toward the window where the general store could be seen across the street. Whitmore's general store. I inherited it from my late husband. How long ago? 3 years this Christmas. The words came easier now, perhaps because Cole was a stranger who had no preconceived notions about her grief or her choices. Thomas died at Normandy, left me the store, and enough insurance money to keep it running. Cole nodded, understanding more than she realized. That's when you learn to be strong. I thought I had, Martha said quietly. But apparently I still have lessons to learn about trusting the wrong people. Harrison Blackwood seemed like the right people. Martha's laugh held no humor. Harrison Blackwood seemed like security, like respectability, like everything a practical widow should want in a second husband. She stirred her coffee absently. I suppose that should have been my first warning, that I was being practical instead of passionate. Cole leaned back in the booth, studying her with those storm-grey eyes. What would passion have looked like? The question caught Martha off guard. She'd been so focused on rebuilding her life sensibly, methodically, that she'd forgotten what it felt like to want something just because it made her heart race instead of her bank account balance. I'm not sure I remember, she admitted. Well, Cole said, finishing the last of his eggs, maybe this is your chance to find out. Before Martha could ask what he meant, the cafe door chimed and Eleanor Fitzgerald swept in, resplendent in her best purple dress and matching hat. Her eyes immediately fixed on Martha and Cole, and her expression shifted from surprise to barely concealed delight at finding such prime gossip material. Martha, dear, Eleanor gushed, approaching their table with the determination of a woman on a mission. What a surprise to find you here, and who is your companion? Martha's spine stiffened, but her voice remained level. Mrs. Fitzgerald, this is Mr. Cole Brennan. Mr. Brennan, Mrs. Eleanor Fitzgerald. Cole rose politely, tipping his hat. Ma'am, Eleanor's eyes swept over his appearance, cataloguing every detail for later sharing. I don't believe we've met, Mr. Brennan. Are you new to Cedar Falls? Just passing through, Cole replied easily. How convenient, Eleanor said, her tone suggesting anything but approval. And you happened to meet our Martha on such an eventful morning. Seemed like she could use some friendly company, Cole said, his voice carrying a subtle warning that made Eleanor's smile falter slightly. Yes, well, Eleanor continued, undaunted, I suppose after this morning's disappointment. Martha needs all the friends she can get. Martha's coffee cup rattled against her saucer as she set it down, her composure finally cracking. Mrs. Fitzgerald, if you have something to say about my situation, perhaps you could simply say it instead of dancing around it like a cat with a cornered mouse. Eleanor's face flushed red. I was simply expressing concern for your welfare, dear. After all, being abandoned at the altar is quite a shock. And now here you are, still in your wedding dress, having breakfast with a complete stranger. People are bound to talk. Let them talk, Cole said quietly, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Seems to me they'd find something to gossip about regardless of what Miss Whitmore does or doesn't do. Eleanor's mouth opened and closed, soundlessly, clearly unused to being challenged so directly. Martha looked at Cole with surprise and something that might have been gratitude. Now, Cole continued, standing up to his full height, which was considerable, if you'll excuse us, Miss Whitmore and I were having a private conversation. Eleanor gathered her skirts huffily. Well, I never— Good day, Mrs. Fitzgerald, Martha said firmly, dismissing the older woman with a politeness that somehow managed to be more cutting than outright rudeness. After Eleanor's dramatic exit, Martha and Cole sat in silence for a moment. Finally, Martha began to laugh, A real laugh this time, full of genuine amusement. "I don't think anyone has ever told Eleanor Fitzgerald to mind her own business quite so diplomatically," she said, wiping tears from her eyes. "She had it coming," Cole replied. "Besides, you looked like you could use some backup." Martha's laughter faded as she really looked at him, this stranger who'd stepped into her disaster of a day and somehow made it bearable. "Why are you doing this? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. And getting involved in my situation certainly won't make your stay in Cedar Falls any easier." Cole was quiet for a long moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "Maybe because I know what it's like to have people look at you like you're not worth their time," he said finally. "Maybe because I've been where you are, not the altar thing, but the feeling that life just kicked you in the teeth for no good reason." "And what did you do about it?" "Started riding. Figured if I kept moving, I'd eventually outrun whatever was chasing me." He looked up at her with a wry smile. "Hasn't worked so far, but I'm still trying." Martha considered this. "What's chasing you, Cole Brennan?" "Same thing that's chasing everyone, I suppose. The fear that maybe we're not worth loving after all." The honesty in his words hit Martha like a physical blow. Here was a man who understood the deepest fear she'd been trying not to acknowledge, that Harrison's abandonment was somehow her fault, that she was fundamentally unworthy of the love and security she'd thought she'd found. "I should go home," she said softly, "change out of this dress, face whatever comes next." "Should and want are two different things," Cole observed. Martha looked down at her wedding dress, at the pearl necklace that had belonged to her mother, at the ring finger that was supposed to be wearing Harrison's gold band by now. "I don't know what I want anymore," she admitted. "That's honest, at least." Cole signaled Patrick for more coffee. "Most people spend their whole lives pretending they know exactly what they want, even when they're miserable." "You sound like you speak from experience." "Some." Cole accepted the fresh coffee with a nod of thanks. "I spent 5 years trying to be what my father wanted me to be, working his ranch, following his rules, pretending I was satisfied with a life that felt like wearing boots 3 sizes too small. What happened? He died, and I found out he'd been gambling away everything we'd worked for, lost the ranch, the cattle, everything. The bank came to collect, and I realized I'd wasted 5 years trying to please a man who'd never cared enough about our future to stop throwing it away at poker tables." Martha's heart ached for the pain she could hear beneath his matter-of-fact tone. "So you started riding?" "So I started riding," he confirmed. "Figured I'd find something worth staying for eventually." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, two wounded souls finding solace in shared understanding. Outside, the normal rhythms of a Saturday morning in Cedar Falls continued. Wagons rumbling past, children playing in the street, the distant sound of hammers from the blacksmith's shop. Life went on, regardless of personal catastrophes. "Cole," Martha said finally, "what you said earlier about people having something else to talk about. What did you mean?" Cole smiled, the first genuinely happy expression she'd seen from him. "Well, Miss Whitmore, I was thinking. You need a way to show this town that you're not going to hide in shame over what happened, and I need a reason to stop running, at least for a while." "I'm not sure I follow." "What if," Cole said, leaning forward across the table, "what if instead of letting them whisper about how you were abandoned, we gave them something else to talk about entirely?" Martha's pulse quickened. "Such as?" "Such as the fact that Martha Whitmore doesn't need Harrison Blackwood or anyone else to make her happy. Such as the fact that she's perfectly capable of choosing her own path, even if that path doesn't make sense to anyone else." "And how exactly would we demonstrate that?" Cole's eyes held hers steadily, and Martha felt something stir in her chest. Something she hadn't felt since Thomas was alive, something that had nothing to do with practicality or security, and everything to do with the way this man looked at her, like she was worth fighting for. "Marry me," he said simply. Martha's coffee cup slipped from her fingers, clattering against the saucer. I beg your pardon? Marry me, Cole repeated, his voice steady and sure. Not because it makes sense, not because it's practical, but because sometimes the best way to start over is to do something completely unexpected. Cole, you're talking nonsense. We barely know each other. You have nothing to offer, no money, no home, no prospects. I've got nothing but love, he interrupted, and sometimes that's enough. The silence that followed Cole's proposal stretched between them like a taut wire. Martha stared at him, searching his face for any sign that he was joking, that this was some elaborate attempt to make her feel better about her morning's humiliation. But his storm-grey eyes held nothing but sincerity and a quiet intensity that made her breath catch. "You're serious," she whispered. "Dead serious." Cole reached across the table, his calloused fingers brushing against her gloved hand. "I know. It sounds crazy." "It doesn't sound crazy," Martha interrupted, surprising herself. "It sounds impossible. Most worthwhile things do." Patrick Murphy chose that moment to refill their coffee cups, pretending not to notice the charged atmosphere at their table. But Martha caught the way his eyes lingered on their joined hands, and she realized that by the end of the day, half the town would know that the jilted bride had been holding hands with a mysterious stranger at Murphy's cafe. "Cole," she said quietly, "you don't understand what you're suggesting. This is a small town. People here have known me since I was a child. They have expectations, opinions about what's proper and what isn't. If I were to marry you, a man I met 3 hours ago, they'd never let me forget it. And if you don't marry me, what will they say then? That poor Martha Whitmore, left at the altar, never quite recovered from the shame of it all?" Cole's voice was gentle but firm. "Seems to me either way they're going to have something to say. Question is, do you want to give them something boring to whisper about, or something that'll have them talking for the next 20 years? Martha pulled her hand away, standing abruptly and moving to the window. Cedar Falls spread out before her, the same streets she'd walked her entire life, the same buildings where she'd conducted business, the same people who'd watched her grow up, marry Thomas, lose him, and now witness her second chance at happiness crumble in the most public way possible. "You don't know what you're asking," she said, her voice barely audible. "I'm asking you to trust me, to trust yourself, to believe that maybe, just maybe, there's more to life than playing it safe." Martha turned back to face him, and Cole was struck by the conflict he saw in her eyes, fear warring with something that looked dangerously like hope. "I trusted Harrison," she said. "I thought I was making a sensible choice, marrying a man with prospects and stability. Look how that turned out." "That's exactly my point." Cole stood and joined her at the window. "You played by their rules, chose the man everyone expected you to choose, and he still walked away. So maybe it's time to stop living your life according to what other people think makes sense." Through the window, they could see people beginning to emerge from the church, the crowd dispersing as the reality of the cancelled wedding settled in. Martha spotted several familiar faces, women she'd known since childhood, men who'd done business with her store, families she'd considered friends. In a few hours, they'd all be sitting around their Sunday dinner tables, dissecting every detail of her humiliation. "What would we even do?" she asked suddenly. "If I said yes, which I'm not, saying I am, what would we do? Where would we live? How would we survive?" Cole smiled, encouraged by the shift from impossible to impractical. "Well, I've got about $15 to my name and a horse that's seen better days. You've got a general store and a house. Between the two of us, we might just make it work." "You'd stay in Cedar Falls, give up your wandering? For the right reason, yes. And what makes you think I'm the right reason?" Cole was quiet for a moment, studying her face in the afternoon light, filtering through the cafe window. "Because in the 3 hours I've known you, I've watched you face down the worst day of your life with more grace and dignity than most people manage in a lifetime. Because you're strong enough to walk into that church and tell the truth when you could have hidden at home. Because you're sitting here with me instead of drowning in self-pity." Martha felt tears prick her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. For the first time since Thomas died, someone was seeing her, really seeing her, not as the widow who needed protecting, or the businesswoman who had everything figured out, but as a woman capable of making her own choices, even if they were difficult ones. "There's something else," Cole continued. "Something I haven't told you." Martha's heart skipped. "What?" "I wasn't just passing through Cedar Falls by accident. I was looking for work, maybe a place to settle down for a while. Been thinking lately that maybe I'm tired of running from ghosts that are never going to stop chasing me anyway. And now I'm thinking maybe I found what I was looking for, just not in the way I expected." A commotion outside interrupted their conversation. Harrison Blackwood's carriage had returned, pulling up in front of the hotel across the street. Martha watched in stunned silence as Harrison climbed down, looking harried and disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled and his usually perfect hair in disarray. "Well," Cole observed dryly, "looks like your railroad man had second thoughts." Martha's stomach clenched as she watched Harrison straighten his coat and stride toward the hotel entrance. Part of her, the part that had planned a life with him, just hours ago, wondered if he'd come back to apologize, to explain, to try to salvage what he'd destroyed. But a larger part of her realized that she didn't want his explanations. The man who could abandon her at the altar wasn't the man she'd thought she was marrying. "Miss Whitmore! Miss Whitmore!" Young Timothy Crawford burst through the cafe door, his face flushed with excitement and exertion. "Mr. Blackwood's back. He's asking for you at the hotel." Patrick Murphy looked up from his ledger, his expression darkening. "That man's got some nerve, showing his face here after what he did." Martha stood frozen, torn between curiosity and disgust. Cole rose beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. "What do you want to do?" he asked quietly. "I don't know," Martha admitted. "Part of me wants to hear what he has to say, and part of me never wants to see him again." "Then maybe you should listen to the part that matters more." Before Martha could respond, the cafe door opened again, and Harrison Blackwood himself entered, his eyes immediately finding Martha in the corner. He looked terrible, his face pale, his hands shaking slightly as he removed his hat. "Martha," he said, his voice carrying across the small space. "Thank God you're here. I need to speak with you." The few other customers in the cafe fell silent, sensing drama. Patrick Murphy's hand moved meaningfully toward the baseball bat he kept behind the counter for troublemakers. "Mr. Blackwood," Martha said coolly, not moving from her spot by the window. "How unexpected." Harrison's eyes shifted to Cole, taking in the stranger's protective stance beside Martha. "I'm sorry. I don't believe we've met." "Cole Brennan," Cole replied, making no effort to shake hands or step away from Martha. "Mr. Brennan." Harrison's tone was polite but dismissive. "I wonder if I might have a private word with Miss Whitmore." "That depends," Cole said evenly, "on whether Miss Whitmore wants a private word with you." Harrison's face flushed red. "I fail to see how this concerns you, Mr. Brennan. This is a private matter between Miss Whitmore and myself." "The moment you left her standing at the altar in front of half the town, it stopped being private," Cole replied, his voice dangerously quiet. Martha stepped forward, placing a restraining hand on Cole's arm. "It's all right," she said. "I'll hear what he has to say." She moved to a table in the center of the cafe, deliberately choosing the most public spot available. If Harrison wanted to make his excuses, he could do it where everyone could hear. Harrison followed, his discomfort obvious, as he realized their conversation would be anything but private. He sat across from her, his hands fidgeting with his hat. "Martha, I know what I did was unforgivable," he began, "but I had no choice. There were complications, business matters that required my immediate attention." What kind of complications? Martha asked, her voice steady. Harrison glanced around the cafe, clearly uncomfortable with the audience. Financial difficulties. The railroad expansion project. It's not as secure as I led people to believe. There are investors pulling out, legal challenges, and I may have overextended myself. You're broke, Martha said, understanding dawning. Not broke, exactly, but yes, my financial situation is precarious. I couldn't marry you under false pretenses, Martha. You deserve better than a man who might not be able to provide for you. The irony wasn't lost on Martha. Harrison had abandoned her because he couldn't offer her security, while Cole had proposed to her with nothing but love to give. So you decided to run away instead of telling me the truth. I panicked, Harrison admitted. I thought if I could get to Denver, meet with some investors, I might be able to salvage the situation. But the meetings didn't go well, and I realized... He reached across the table, trying to take her hand. I realized I'd made a terrible mistake. Martha pulled her hands away. Yes, you did. Martha, please. I'm asking for your forgiveness. We can work through this together. The wedding can be rescheduled. No. The simple word hung in the air between them. Harrison blinked, clearly not expecting such immediate rejection. No, he repeated. No, Harrison. We cannot work through this together. We cannot reschedule the wedding. We cannot pretend this morning didn't happen. But Martha, I love you. Do you? Martha's voice was sharp. Because love doesn't abandon someone at the altar. Love doesn't run away instead of facing problems together. Love doesn't put financial considerations above the person you claim to care about. Harrison's face crumpled. I know I handled this badly, but my feelings for you are genuine. I came back, didn't. That has to count for something. You came back because your other options didn't work out, Martha replied. Not because you realized you'd hurt me, not because you couldn't live without me. You came back because I'm your fallback plan. The accuracy of her assessment was written clearly on Harrison's face. He opened his mouth to protest, but no words came. Martha, he said finally, his voice pleading, what we had, what we could have, it's real. Don't throw it away because of one mistake. One mistake. Martha's composure finally cracked. Harrison, you left me standing in front of our entire community in my wedding dress. You made me face their pity and their gossip and their questions. You turned what should have been the happiest day of my life into a humiliation I'll carry forever. That's not a mistake, that's a choice. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but her voice remained strong. And now you want me to pretend it never happened? To welcome you back with open arms because you've decided I'm better than nothing? That's not. It is exactly that. Martha stood, her silk skirts rustling around her. You know what the worst part is, Harrison? I would have understood the money. I would have worked with you to find a solution. We could have postponed the wedding, scaled back our plans, found a way to make it work. But you didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth. You didn't respect me enough to let me make my own choice about our future. Harrison looked stricken. Martha, please, no. Martha's voice was final. I'm done being the practical choice, the safe option, the woman who's supposed to be grateful for whatever scraps of affection come her way. I deserve better than that. She turned to leave, but Harrison caught her arm. And you think he can give you better? He nodded toward Cole, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, but was now moving forward, his expression dangerous. I think, Martha said, pulling free of Harrison's grip, that he already has. Cole reached them just as Harrison's face twisted with desperate anger. You're making a mistake, Martha. You barely know this man. He's got nothing to offer you. No money, no position, no future. You're throwing away everything we built together for what? A stranger who'll probably be gone by morning. Everything we built? Martha's laugh was bitter. What exactly did we build, Harrison? A relationship based on what was practical instead of what was real, a future planned around your success instead of our happiness, an engagement that you walked away from the moment it became inconvenient. You're being emotional. Yes, I am. Martha's voice rose, and every conversation in the cafe stopped. For the first time in 3 years, I'm being emotional instead of practical, and it feels wonderful. She looked around the cafe, at the faces watching her drama unfold, at Patrick Murphy nodding approvingly behind his counter, at Cole standing ready to defend her honor if necessary. You want to know what Cole has offered me? She continued, her voice carrying clearly through the room. He's offered me honesty. He's offered me respect. He's offered me a choice made out of hope instead of fear. Harrison's face cycled through several emotions, disbelief, anger, and finally, desperate calculation. Martha, you're upset. I understand that. But don't make a decision you'll regret. This man could be anyone, a criminal, a drifter, someone who'll take advantage of your vulnerability. The only person who's taken advantage of my vulnerability, Martha said quietly, is you. The words hit Harrison like a physical blow. He looked around the cafe, seeming to realize for the first time that their entire conversation had been witnessed by a dozen people who would spread the story throughout the county by evening. This isn't over, he said, his voice low and threatening. You'll realize your mistake soon enough. Is that a threat? Cole asked, stepping closer. Harrison looked at Cole, really looked at him, and seemed to recognize something in the younger man's eyes that made him step back. No, he said quickly. No, of course not. I'm simply saying that Martha will come to her senses. I already have, Martha said firmly. Goodbye, Harrison. Harrison stood for a moment longer, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Finally, he jammed his hat back on his head and stalked out of the cafe, leaving behind a silence that buzzed with excitement and speculation. Martha sank back into her chair, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation was fading, leaving her shaky and uncertain. Well, Patrick Murphy called out cheerfully, that was better than a traveling show. The comment broke the tension, and several people chuckled. Martha looked around at the faces watching her, some sympathetic, some curious, but none judgmental. These people had watched her handle Harrison's abandonment with dignity, and they'd seen her stand up for herself when he tried to manipulate her into taking him back. Cole sat across from her, his expression gentle but serious. You did good, he said quietly. Did I? I feel like I just burned every bridge I had in this town. Sometimes you have to burn bridges to keep people from following you across them. Martha looked at him, this man who'd appeared in her life at its lowest point and somehow made her feel stronger instead of weaker. Cole, about your proposal? Take your time, he said. I'm not going anywhere. Actually, Martha said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice, I don't think I need time. Cole's eyes widened. Martha, ask me again, she said, her heart pounding. Ask me again, and this time I'll give you a real answer. Cole stood slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. The cafe fell silent again, sensing they were witnessing something extraordinary. Martha Helena Whitmore, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the room. I've got nothing to offer you but love and a promise to spend every day trying to deserve you. Will you marry me? Martha stood as well, her wedding dress rustling around her like a promise of possibilities. Yes, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Yes, Cole Brennan, I'll marry you. The cafe erupted in applause and cheers. Patrick Murphy whooped from behind his counter, and several of the other customers raised their coffee cups in toast. Someone started clapping, and soon the entire room was celebrating this unexpected twist in the day's drama. But Martha heard none of it. All she could see was Cole's face, the wonder and joy and relief written there as he reached for her hands. Are you sure? He asked, his voice barely audible above the celebration. "I'm sure," she said, and realized she meant it completely. "I'm tired of making choices out of fear. It's time to make one out of love." Cole's smile was like the sunrise after the longest night. "When?" Martha looked down at her wedding dress, then back at his face. "How about now?" "Now?" Cole's eyebrows shot up. "Martha, we can't. The license, the ceremony." "Reverend Morrison is probably still at the church, wondering what happened to his wedding service," Martha said, her excitement building. "The flowers are arranged, the church is decorated, and I'm already dressed for the occasion. But what about living our lives according to everyone else's expectations?" Martha interrupted. "What about waiting for the perfect moment that may never come? What about being practical and sensible, and all the things that got me abandoned at the altar this morning?" Cole stared at her, this remarkable woman who transformed from a jilted bride into a force of nature in the space of a single conversation. "Martha Whitmore," he said, "you are absolutely incredible. Is that a yes?" "That's a yes," he said, and kissed her hand like she was a queen, instead of a woman in a wrinkled wedding dress who'd just caused the biggest scandal in Cedar Falls history. Patrick Murphy raised his voice above the continuing celebration. "Well then, what are we waiting for? Let's get these two to the church before they come to their senses." The entire cafe emptied as everyone rushed to witness what would surely become the most talked about wedding in the county's history. Martha and Cole found themselves at the center of an impromptu parade, walking back toward the church where her day had begun in humiliation and would end in joy. As they walked, Cole leaned close to her ear. "No regrets?" Martha looked around, at the people accompanying them. Some the same faces that had witnessed her earlier shame, now celebrating her unexpected happiness. She thought about Harrison, probably packing his bags at the hotel, and about the safe, predictable life she'd almost settled for. "No regrets," she said firmly, "only possibilities." And as the church bells began to ring, this time for a wedding that would actually happen, Martha Helena Whitmore realized that sometimes the best decisions were the ones that made no sense to anyone but yourself. The walk back to the Methodist church felt like a dream to Martha, but the kind of dream where everything was sharper and more vivid than waking life. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street, and the small crowd that had gathered from Murphy's Cafe was growing larger as word spread through town like wildfire. Reverend Morrison was indeed still at the church, sitting on the front steps with his head in his hands, probably wondering how he was going to explain the morning's events to his wife. When he looked up and saw the approaching group, Martha, still in her wedding dress, Cole beside her, and half the town trailing behind, his weathered face went through a series of expressions that would have been comical under different circumstances. "Miss Whitmore," he called out, rising to his feet, "what's happening here?" Martha felt a moment of uncertainty. Standing here in front of the church where she'd been humiliated just hours ago, she realized the magnitude of what she was about to do. But then Cole's hand found hers, steady and warm, and her doubts evaporated. "Reverend Morrison," she said clearly, "I'd like you to perform a wedding ceremony." "A wedding ceremony?" The elderly preacher's eyes darted between Martha and Cole, confusion evident. "But I thought, that is, Mr. Blackwood." "Mr. Blackwood is no longer relevant to this conversation," Martha replied firmly. "This is Cole Brennan, and we'd like to be married. Today, now, if possible." Reverend Morrison's mouth opened and closed several times before he managed to speak. "Miss Whitmore, surely you're not serious. The shock of this morning's events. Perhaps you should take some time to consider." "I've never been more certain of anything in my life," Martha interrupted, and the conviction in her voice seemed to convince the Reverend that she was indeed serious. "But the legalities," he protested weakly. "The marriage license, the proper procedures." Sarah Murphy pushed forward from the crowd. "Reverend, Judge Hamilton is here. He can handle the license right now if these two are determined to go through with this. Martha turned to see Judge Hamilton indeed, standing among the spectators, his usually stern face betraying amusement at the day's unexpected turn of events. He was a practical man who'd presided over the county court for 20 years, and he stepped forward with the air of someone who'd seen stranger things than impromptu weddings. "Miss Whitmore, Mr. Brennan," he said formally, "if you're both of legal age and sound mind, I can issue a marriage license immediately, though I feel obligated to ask, are you both certain this is what you want?" Cole looked at Martha, his storm-grey eyes searching her face one last time for any sign of doubt. "Martha, last chance to come to your senses." "My senses are perfectly intact," she replied, squeezing his hand. "Judge Hamilton, we're ready." The judge nodded and pulled a folded document from his coat pocket. "I always carry a blank license, or two," he explained with a slight smile. "You never know when romance might strike in a county courthouse." As Judge Hamilton filled out the paperwork, asking for basic information from both bride and groom, Martha became aware of the growing crowd around them. Word had spread through Cedar Falls with remarkable speed, and people were emerging from houses and businesses to witness what was already being called the most dramatic day in the town's history. She spotted Eleanor Fitzgerald among the onlookers, the banker's wife, looking like she'd swallowed something particularly sour. Next to her stood Dr. Benjamin Crawford, who'd delivered half the babies in the county and whose opinion carried considerable weight. His expression was thoughtful rather than disapproving, and when he caught Martha's eye, he gave her an almost imperceptible nod of approval. "There," Judge Hamilton announced, signing the license with a flourish, "all legal and binding. Reverend Morrison, they're all yours." Reverend Morrison looked around at the assembled crowd, then back at Martha and Cole. Whatever reservations he might have had seemed to dissolve in the face of their obvious determination and the community's obvious investment in seeing this through. "Very well," he said, straightening his shoulders. "If we're going to do this, we're going to do it properly. Everyone inside." The church filled quickly, the same pews that had been empty during the morning's aborted ceremony, now packed with curious townspeople. Martha noticed that someone, probably Sarah Murphy, had taken the time to straighten the flowers and light the candles again. The late afternoon light streaming through the stained glass windows cast colorful patterns across the wooden floor, and the whole scene felt blessed rather than hasty. Cole tugged gently on Martha's hand as they reached the altar. "You know," he said quietly, "when I woke up this morning, I never imagined I'd be getting married by sunset." "When I woke up this morning," Martha replied, "I thought I knew exactly how my life was going to unfold. Shows what I know about planning." Reverend Morrison took his place at the front of the church, his Bible open to the familiar passages he'd recited at dozens of weddings over the years. But as he looked at Martha and Cole, he seemed to realize that this ceremony required something different than his usual routine. "Friends," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the packed church, "we are gathered here today to witness something extraordinary, not just the union of two souls, but the triumph of hope over fear, of love over convention, of faith over despair." Martha felt tears prick her eyes, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. This morning, she'd stood in this same spot, feeling like her life was ending. Now she felt like it was finally beginning. "Martha Helena Whitmore," Reverend Morrison continued, "you have faced trials that would have broken a lesser spirit. The loss of your first husband, the building of a business, the strength to carry on when many would have given up. Today, you show us that resilience is not just about enduring hardship, but about remaining open to unexpected blessings." He turned to Cole. "Cole Brennan, you are a stranger to our community, but in the space of a single day, you have shown us the kind of man you are, a man who sees worth where others see vulnerability, who offers protection where others offer judgment, who chooses love even when he has little else to give. Martha glanced sideways at Cole and saw that his jaw was tight with emotion. This ceremony was as overwhelming for him as it was for her. The sudden transition from solitary drifter to beloved husband happening so quickly it might have given a lesser man pause. Do you, Cole Brennan, take Martha Helena Whitmore to be your lawfully wedded wife, to love her, honor her, protect her and cherish her, for better or worse, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live? I do, Cole said, his voice steady and sure, with everything I am and everything I hope to become. Do you, Martha Helena Whitmore, take Cole Brennan to be your lawfully wedded husband, to love him, honor him, support him, and cherish him for better or worse, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live? Martha looked into Cole's eyes, seeing the man who'd appeared at her darkest moment and somehow made everything bright again. I do, she said, her voice ringing with certainty, with all my heart and all my faith in what we can build together. The rings? Reverend Morrison asked. Martha's hand went instinctively to her throat, where her mother's pearl necklace lay against her skin. Without hesitation, she unclasped it and handed it to Cole. Thomas always said these pearls were meant to be shared with someone special, she said softly. I can't think of anyone more deserving. Cole's hands trembled slightly as he fastened the necklace around her throat, his fingers gentle against her skin. For his ring, he pulled a simple silver band from his pocket, a signet ring that had belonged to his father, the one valuable thing he'd kept despite all his father's failures. This was my father's, he said, slipping it onto Martha's finger. He wasn't a good man in many ways, but he taught me that a promise is only as good as the person making it. I promise you, Martha, that this ring represents everything good I can be. Martha took the ring and placed it on Cole's finger, marveling at how right it looked there. And I promise you that whatever we face, we'll face it together. Reverend. Morrison smiled, the first genuinely happy expression Martha had seen from him all day. By the power vested in me by the territory of Montana and in the presence of God and this community, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Cole, you may kiss your bride. The kiss was gentle at first, almost tentative, as if they were both still adjusting to the reality of what they'd just done. But as the church erupted in cheers and applause, Cole's arms tightened around Martha, and she felt herself melting into the embrace of this man who was now her husband. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and laughing, the congregation surged forward to offer congratulations. Dr. Crawford was among the first to reach. Them, his weathered face creased with approval. That, he announced loudly, was the finest display of courage I've seen in 40 years of practicing medicine in this town. Mrs. Brennan, Mr. Brennan, you have my blessing and my respect. The use of her new name sent a thrill through Martha. Mrs. Brennan. It felt strange and wonderful and completely right all at once. Sarah Murphy was crying openly as she hugged Martha. I've never seen anything so romantic in my entire life, she sobbed. When you walked into that cafe this morning, if someone had told me you'd be married to a different man by evening, I'd have thought they were touched in the head. I might be touched in the head, Martha laughed, but if I am, it's the best kind of madness I've ever experienced. Judge Hamilton approached with the completed marriage certificate. Mr. and Mrs. Brennan, he said formally, your union is now legal and binding in the eyes of the law. May I suggest you frame this document? Something tells me it's going to become quite a conversation piece. As the crowd began to thin out, people heading home to spread the news of the day's extraordinary events, Martha found herself standing in the churchyard with her new husband, still wearing her wedding dress, but now properly married. "So," Cole said, his arm around her waist, "what happens now?" Martha looked toward her house at the end of the street, then at the general store that had been her livelihood for 3 years. "Now I suppose we figure out how to build a life, together. Any thoughts on where we might start?" Martha smiled, feeling a lightness in her chest that she hadn't experienced since before Thomas died. "Well, I have a house that's been far too quiet for far too long, and you have a horse that probably needs a good meal and a proper stable. Sounds like the beginning of a perfect partnership." As they walked toward Martha's house, she caught sight of movement at the hotel. Harrison Blackwood was loading his luggage into his carriage, preparing for his final departure from Cedar Falls. For a moment, their eyes met across the street, and Martha saw the full weight of his regret and loss written on his face. But instead of satisfaction or vindication, she felt only pity. Harrison had chosen fear over love, security over happiness, and in doing so, he'd lost something precious. She hoped he would learn from his mistakes, but that was no longer her concern. Cole noticed the direction of her gaze. "Any second thoughts?" "None," Martha said firmly. "That man taught me what I don't want in a marriage. You've shown me what I do want." "And what's that?" "Honesty, courage, someone who chooses me not because I'm the sensible option, but because life is better with me in it." Cole stopped walking and pulled her into his arms right there in the middle of the street. "Martha Brennan," he said, "life is infinitely better with you in it." As he kissed her again, Martha heard the church bells beginning to ring, not the confused, aborted toll of the morning, but a clear, joyful celebration that carried across the valley. Tomorrow there would be practical matters to attend to. Cole would need to find work, they would need to combine their lives and possessions, and they would have to navigate the social implications of their whirlwind romance. But tonight, there was only this, the feeling of being completely, thoroughly, ridiculously in love with a man who'd appeared at exactly the right moment to remind her that the best things in life rarely made sense to anyone but the people brave enough to reach. For them, "Welcome home, Mrs. Brennan," Cole murmured against her ear. "Welcome home, Mr. Brennan," she replied, and meant it with every fiber of her being. As they continued toward the house, Martha caught sight of Eleanor Fitzgerald standing on her front porch, clearly torn between scandalized disapproval and eager curiosity about what would happen next. Martha gave the older woman a cheerful wave, delighting in the way Eleanor's mouth fell open in shock. "I think," Martha said to Cole, "we're going to give this town enough gossip to last them through the winter." "Good," Cole replied. "If they're talking about us, they're probably having more fun than they would otherwise." Martha laughed, feeling giddy with happiness and possibility. This morning, she'd been a jilted bride facing public humiliation. Tonight, she was a newlywed walking toward a future that promised to be anything but predictable. As they reached her front door, their front door now, Cole paused with his hand on the latch. "Martha, I need you to know something." "What?" "I meant what I said in the cafe. I don't have much to offer you in terms of material things. My savings won't last long, and I don't have any guaranteed prospects for work. You're taking a considerable risk, tying your life to mine." Martha reached up and touched his face, marveling at the fact that she now had the right to do so whenever she pleased. "Cole Brennan, you gave me back my faith in love, my courage to take risks, and my belief that I deserve to be chosen rather than settled for. If that's not valuable enough to build a marriage on, I don't know what is." Cole's smile was like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. "In that case, Mrs. Brennan, shall we see what married life has to offer?" "Lead the way, Mr. Brennan," Martha replied, and stepped across the threshold into her new life, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with a partner who'd already proven he would choose love over fear every single time. Tiki. Door closed behind them with a soft click, sealing them into their shared future. Outside, the church bells continued to ring, and the people of Cedar Falls settled in for an evening of discussing the most romantic, impractical, and absolutely perfect wedding their little town had ever witnessed. And in years to come, when people told the story of the widow who was left at the altar only to marry a broke cowboy the same day, they would always mention how right it had turned out to be, how Martha and Cole Brennan had built a love story that proved sometimes the best decisions are the ones that don't make sense to anyone, but the people brave enough to make them. 3 months after the wedding that scandalized and delighted Cedar Falls in equal measure, Martha Brennan stood behind the counter of her general store, watching her husband repair the front steps with the kind of methodical care that had become his trademark. Winter was settling over Montana, and Cole had spent the last several weeks weatherproofing every building Martha owned, as if he could single-handedly protect their new life from the storms ahead. The changes in their daily routine had been more profound than either of them had anticipated. Cole had thrown himself into learning the general store business with the same intensity he'd once applied to ranch work, mastering inventory management and customer relations with surprising speed. What had started as necessity, Martha needed help and Cole needed work, had evolved into a true partnership that strengthened both the business and their marriage. "Mrs. Brennan," called Amelia Jenkins from the fabric section, "do you have any more of that blue wool? My youngest is growing faster than I can keep up with." Martha smiled at the name that still sent a small thrill through her every time she heard it. "Let me check the back room, Mrs. Jenkins. Cole ordered extra fabric last week specifically for winter clothing." As she moved through the store, Martha marveled at how natural it felt to work alongside Cole. He had an intuitive understanding of what people needed and when they needed it, and his easy manner with customers had actually increased their business. Farmers, who'd been dealing with Martha for years now, brought their wives along specifically to chat with Cole about everything from livestock to weather patterns. The bell above the door chimed, and Dr. Crawford entered, stamping snow from his boots. His medical bag suggested he was making rounds, but his expression indicated he had other business on his mind. "Good morning, Martha, Cole," he said, removing his hat. "Might I have a word with both of you?" Cole looked up from his hammerwork, immediately alert. "Nothing wrong, I hope?" Quite the opposite, actually. Dr. Crawford's weathered face broke into a grin. "I've just come from the Hendersons' place. Young Billy broke his leg falling from their barn roof, and while I was setting the bone, his father mentioned something interesting." Martha exchanged glances with Cole. The Hendersons owned one of the largest ranches in the county, and anything that interested them was usually significant. "Old Henderson's been looking for a foreman," Dr. Crawford continued, "someone with experience who can handle both cattle and men. Someone he can trust to run the operation while he focuses on expanding into horse breeding." Cole set down his hammer slowly. "I'm listening." "He asked about you specifically, Cole. Word's gotten around about your work ethic, and several folks have mentioned your background with ranching. Henderson wants to know if you'd be interested in talking to him." Martha felt her heart skip a beat. The Henderson Ranch was one of the most successful operations in 3 counties, and the foreman position would provide steady income, respect, and security for their future. "What kind of arrangement is he considering?" Martha asked. "Good wages, a house on the property for married couples, and after 5 years, a partnership stake in the horse breeding operation." Dr. Crawford's eyes twinkled. "He specifically mentioned that he'd want your wife involved too, Martha. Apparently, he's impressed by how well you've managed the store and thinks you'd bring valuable business sense to the ranch operations." "Cole, was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. Martha could practically see him weighing the opportunity against the life they'd been building in town. "It's a generous offer," he said finally, "but I'd need to think about it. Talk it over with my wife." Dr. Crawford nodded approvingly. "Henderson said to take your time. He's not in a hurry to make the wrong choice, but he wanted you to know the position is yours if you want it." After the doctor left, Martha and Cole found themselves staring at each other across the store counter, both processing the implications of what they'd just heard. "It's everything you used to want," Martha said quietly. "A chance to get back to ranching, but with better prospects than you ever had before." "It's what I thought I wanted," Cole corrected, "before I knew there were other things to consider." "Such," as Cole gestured around the store. "This, what we've built here, your business, your connections to the community. I won't ask you to give up everything you've worked for just because someone offers me a job." Martha felt a rush of love for this man who'd consistently put her needs alongside his own desires. But she also recognized the longing in his voice. When he talked about ranching, the way his face lit up whenever farmers discussed livestock or land management. "Cole," she said carefully, "what if giving it up wasn't necessary? What if we could find a way to do both?" Before Cole could ask what she meant, the bell chimed again, and Sarah Murphy burst through the door, her face flushed with excitement. "And cold air. Martha, Cole! You'll never guess what I just heard at the post office." She paused dramatically, clearly enjoying having the latest gossip. "Harrison Blackwood is engaged." Martha felt Cole tense beside her, but her own reaction surprised her. Instead of shock or hurt, she felt only mild curiosity. "Is he now?" she said calmly. "Anyone we know?" "Some banker's daughter from Denver. Apparently his financial situation improved dramatically after he secured backing from her father's firm." Sarah's eyes gleamed with malicious satisfaction. "Word is, it's a very practical arrangement. Mutual benefit rather than mutual affection." "Well," Martha said, returning to her inventory checklist, "I suppose that's exactly the kind of marriage he was looking for all along." Sarah looked disappointed by Martha's lack of reaction. "Aren't you even a little curious about the details?" "Not particularly." Martha looked up at Cole, who was watching her with admiration and something that might have been relief. "I'm rather too busy being happy with my own marriage to worry about anyone else's." Sarah deflated slightly, clearly having expected more drama. "Well, I just thought you should know." "Thank you for thinking of us," Cole said politely. "But as my wife said, we're quite content with our own affairs." After Sarah left, Martha turned back to Cole. "Now, where were we? Oh yes, the Henderson offer." "Martha, you can't seriously be considering—" "I'm considering exactly what I said. A way to do both." Martha moved around the counter to stand closer to him. "What if we took the Henderson position, but kept the store as well?" Cole's eyebrows rose. "How would that work?" "Sarah's been looking for steady employment since her uncle started talking about retiring. She's bright, trustworthy, and knows half our customers by name. We could hire her to manage the store during the week, and I could come into town on weekends to handle the books and major decisions." "You'd want to do that? Split your time between ranching and storekeeping?" Martha considered the idea, feeling excitement build as the possibilities became clearer. "Cole, I spent 3 years running this store by myself, making every decision alone. The idea of having a true partner in business, someone whose skills complement mine rather than duplicate them, is more appealing than you might think. And you wouldn't mind leaving town? Starting over somewhere new?" "I wouldn't be leaving," Martha corrected. "I'd be expanding, taking what I've learned here and applying it to something bigger." Cole was quiet for several minutes, and Martha could see him working through the practical implications. Finally, he looked up at her with that smile that never failed to make her heart skip. "Mrs. Brennan," he said, Have I mentioned lately that you're absolutely brilliant? Not today, she replied, grinning, but I'm always happy to hear it. What do you say we will ride out to Henderson Place tomorrow? Take a look at what they're offering and see if we can make it work. Martha felt a thrill of anticipation. This was what she'd fallen in love with, not just Cole himself, but the way he approached life as an adventure to be shared, rather than a series of problems to be solved alone. I'd say that sounds perfect, she replied. Though I should probably change out of my work dress first. The next morning dawned clear and cold, perfect weather for the ride to Henderson's ranch. Martha had borrowed a riding outfit from Sarah, and as she watched Cole saddle 2 horses behind the store, she marveled at how comfortable he looked handling the animals. This was his element, she realized. The outdoors, the physical work, the connection to land and livestock that had been missing from his life in town. The Henderson Ranch sprawled across a valley 20 miles north of Cedar Falls, with the main house positioned to overlook rolling pastures that stretched to the foothills of the mountains. As they rode up the main drive, Martha could see cattle grazing in the distance and several outbuildings that spoke of a well-maintained, prosperous operation. Jacob Henderson met them on the front porch, a tall, weathered man in his 60s, whose handshake was firm and whose eyes were sharp with intelligence. His wife, Rebecca, joined them for coffee in the main house parlor, and Martha immediately liked her straightforward manner and obvious affection for her husband. Dr. Crawford tells us you're considering our offer, Henderson said without preamble. I appreciate directness, so I'll be straight with you. I need someone who can handle the day-to-day operations while I focus on building the horse program. Someone with experience, good judgment, and the ability to manage men who've been working cattle longer than you've been alive. Cole nodded. I understand the challenges. I've dealt with similar situations before. And you, Mrs. Brennan, Rebecca Henderson added, we understand you've been quite successful with your store in town. Jacob's been saying we need someone with business sense to help us modernize our record-keeping and maybe expand our markets. Martha leaned forward, intrigued. What kind of expansion are you considering? Well, Henderson said, we've been thinking about supplying beef directly to the railroad camps instead of selling to middlemen. And Rebecca's been wanting to start a chicken operation, eggs and meat for the growing towns in the territory. The numbers would work better if we had someone who understood profit margins and customer relationships, Rebecca added. Most ranchers are good at raising cattle, but terrible at selling them efficiently. As they talked, Martha found herself getting excited about the possibilities. This wasn't just a job for Cole, it was an opportunity for both of them to build something larger than either could accomplish alone. There's something else, Henderson said, as they prepared to tour the property. The foreman's house needs work. Been empty for 2 years since our last manager moved on. If you're interested in the position, you'd be welcome to modify it however you see fit. The house turned out to be a solid 2-story structure with good bones but outdated fixtures. As Martha walked through the rooms, she could envision how they might arrange their furniture, where she might set up a small office for managing both ranch and store business. It's got potential, Cole said, coming up behind her in what would be their bedroom. Good view of the pastures close enough. To the main house for consultation, but far enough for privacy. I can see us here, Martha admitted. It feels like a place where we could build a real future. The tour of the ranch facilities impressed them both. Henderson ran a tight operation with quality livestock and well-maintained equipment. The men they met seemed competent and respectful, and Martha noticed how they responded to Cole's questions about cattle management and seasonal planning. One more thing, Henderson said as they concluded their visit. I believe in profit sharing. After your first year, assuming everything works out, you'd receive a percentage of the ranch's annual profits in addition to your salary. After 5 years, as doctor, Crawford mentioned, I'd be looking at bringing the right person in as a full partner. As they rode back toward Cedar Falls, Martha and Cole were both quiet, processing everything they'd seen and heard. "It's a good offer," Cole said finally. "Better than I ever expected to receive." "It's more than good," Martha agreed. "It's exactly the kind of opportunity we could build a real life around." "Are you sure about the store arrangement? It would mean a lot of traveling back and forth, especially in winter." Martha smiled. "Cole, 3 months ago I was planning to marry a man who saw me as a convenient business arrangement. Now I'm married to someone who treats me as a true partner in everything we do. I think I can handle a little traveling." That evening, they sat in their kitchen working out the details of how they might make it all function. Martha would train Sarah to manage the day-to-day store operations, maintain ownership, but step back from daily management. Cole would take the Henderson position with the understanding that Martha would be involved in developing the business side of the ranch operations. "We'd be taking a risk," Cole pointed out, "giving up the certainty of what we have for the possibility of something better." "When has playing it safe ever worked out for me?" Martha laughed. "Besides, I seem to remember a certain cowboy once telling me that sometimes the best decisions are the ones that don't make sense to anyone else." Cole reached across the table and took her hand. "Mrs. Brennan, are you suggesting we make another impractical decision based on nothing but hope and determination?" "I'm suggesting," Martha replied, "that we continue building the kind of life that makes people tell stories about us for years to come." "In that case," Cole said, bringing her hand to his lips, "I think we should ride back to Henderson's tomorrow and accept his offer." As they sat there planning their future, Martha reflected on how dramatically her life had changed since that terrible October morning when Harrison had abandoned her at the altar. Then she'd thought happiness meant security and respectability. Now she understood that true happiness meant partnership with someone who saw possibilities where others saw problems, who chose adventure over safety, and who loved her enough to build dreams around her strengths rather than her limitations. "Cole," she said suddenly, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if Harrison hadn't run away that morning?" Cole considered the question seriously. "I think you would have been miserable," he said finally, "and I would have ridden through Cedar Falls and never known what I was missing." "No regrets, then?" "None," Cole said firmly. "The only thing I regret is that it took me 28 years to find you." Martha smiled, thinking about the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the humiliation of a cancelled wedding to the joy of an unexpected marriage, from the safety of a predictable life to the excitement of an uncertain future built on love and mutual respect. "Well then," she said, "let's go build ourselves a life worth remembering." And as the winter wind whistled around their small house in Cedar Falls, Martha and Cole Brennan made their plans to take on the Henderson Ranch, expand the general store, and continue proving that sometimes the most impractical decisions turn out to be the most practical ones of all. 1 year after Martha and Cole Brennan had accepted the Henderson Ranch position, the autumn cattle drive was proceeding better than anyone had anticipated. Martha sat astride her horse on a ridge overlooking the valley, watching Cole direct the movement of nearly 300 head of cattle toward the railroad depot in Billings. What had started as an experiment in direct sales had evolved into the most profitable venture in the ranch's history. The transformation hadn't been without its challenges. Moving to the ranch had required Martha to learn an entirely new set of skills: horseback riding, cattle management, and the delicate art of managing ranch hands, who initially weren't sure what to make of a woman who insisted on being involved in operational decisions. But her business acumen had proven invaluable, and the men had come to respect her judgment as much as they admired Cole's leadership. "Mrs. Brennan!" called out Tommy Rodriguez, one of the younger ranch hands. "Mr. Henderson wants to see you at the chuck wagon when you get a chance." Martha urged her horse down the slope, marveling at how natural it felt to navigate the terrain that had seemed so intimidating just months ago. The general store in Cedar Falls was thriving under Sarah Murphy's management, with weekly visits from Martha to handle finances and major purchasing decisions. The arrangement had worked so well that 2 other businesses in town had asked Martha to consult on their operations. She found Jacob Henderson standing beside the cook's wagon, studying a telegram with a frown that could have meant anything from minor irritation to major disaster. "Bad news?" Martha asked, dismounting and tying her horse to the wagon wheel. "Complicated news," Henderson replied, handing her the telegram. "From my brother in Denver. He's got a proposition that could change everything we're doing here." Martha read the message twice, her eyebrows rising with each word. Henderson's brother owned a meatpacking facility that supplied restaurants and hotels throughout Colorado. He was proposing a partnership that would guarantee purchase of their entire cattle output at premium prices, but it would require significant expansion of the ranch operation. "He wants us to double our herd size within 2 years," Martha said, looking up from the telegram, "and establish breeding operations for 3 other ranches in the territory." Henderson added, "It would mean serious money, but also serious risk. We'd need to buy more land, hire more men, build new facilities." Martha's mind immediately began calculating the financial implications. The initial investment would be substantial. We'd need to secure loans, negotiate with neighboring ranches for land purchases, and completely restructure our operations. "Exactly why I wanted to talk to you before mentioning it to Cole," Henderson said. "Your husband's got good instincts about cattle and men, but you understand numbers and long-term planning in ways most ranchers never learn." As if summoned by their conversation, Cole appeared around the side of the wagon, his hat pushed back and his shirt dusty from the day's work. "Everything all right? Tommy said you needed to see Martha." Henderson handed him the telegram without comment. Martha watched Cole's face as he read, noting the way his expression shifted from curiosity to excitement to careful consideration. "This is big," Cole said finally. "Bigger than anything I've ever attempted," Henderson admitted. "At my age, I'm not sure I've got the energy to supervise an expansion of this magnitude." Martha looked between the 2 men, sensing an undercurrent to the conversation that hadn't been explicitly stated. "What exactly are you thinking, Mr. Henderson?" Henderson was quiet for a long moment, his weathered hands working the brim of his hat. "I'm thinking maybe it's time for younger folks to take the lead on something like this. Rebecca and I have been talking about stepping back, maybe spending more time with our grandchildren in California." Cole's eyes widened. "Are you offering us the ranch?" "I'm offering you a partnership in something bigger than this ranch," Henderson corrected. "If we pursue my brother's proposition, we'd be looking at a cattle operation spanning 3 counties. It would require someone with your skills running the day-to-day operations, and someone with Martha's business sense managing the financial and logistical aspects." Martha felt her pulse quicken. The scope of what Henderson was describing went far beyond anything she'd imagined when they'd first accepted the foreman position. "What kind of partnership are you considering?" she asked, forcing herself to focus on practical details rather than getting swept away by the possibilities. 60-40 split initially," Henderson said. "Rebecca and I would retain majority ownership for the first 5 years while you prove the expansion concept. After that, assuming everything works out, we'd transition to equal partners, with the understanding that you'd eventually buy us out completely when we're ready to retire." Cole sat down heavily on a nearby crate, clearly overwhelmed by the magnitude of the opportunity. "Mr. Henderson, what you're describing would make us one of the largest cattle operations in the territory." "Exactly," Henderson grinned. "And from what I've seen this past year, you 2 are the only people I'd trust to make it work." That evening, Martha and Cole sat on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold while they discussed the most significant decision of their married life. The cattle drive had been successful, the men were settled for the night, and they finally had privacy to process what Henderson had proposed. "It's everything I dreamed about when I was young and foolish," Cole said, his voice thoughtful. "The kind of operation that takes generations to build, and he's offering to hand it to us in 2 years. It's also the kind of risk that could destroy everything we've worked for," Martha pointed out, though her tone suggested she was playing devil's advocate rather than expressing genuine opposition. "True. If we fail, we'd lose not just our investment, but Henderson's as well. The debt alone could take decades to recover from." Martha pulled her shawl closer against the evening chill. "On the other hand, if we succeed, we'd be building something that could support not just us, but our children and their children." Cole turned to look at her, catching something in her tone. Children. Martha felt her cheeks warm, though whether from embarrassment or excitement she wasn't sure. "Well, we haven't really discussed it, but I assumed." "Martha," Cole said softly, "are you telling me what I think you're telling me?" "I'm telling you that Dr. Crawford confirmed what I suspected when he came out to check on the injured horse last week," she replied, unable to keep the smile from her voice. "We're going to have a baby." Cole's face went through a series of expressions: shock, joy, concern, and overwhelming love, before he pulled her into his arms with a whoop that probably woke half the ranch hands. "A baby," he repeated as if testing the words. "Martha, that's incredible." "It also makes Henderson's offer more complicated," Martha said, though she was laughing at Cole's obvious delight. "We'd be making a decision that affects not just us, but our child's future." Cole held her at arm's length, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "What do you think? Really think? Not what you think I want to hear." Martha considered the question seriously. "I think we'd be fools not to try. We've proven we work well together. We understand both the cattle business and the financial side of expansion, and Henderson's brother's offer provides exactly the kind of market guarantee that makes large-scale operations viable. And the baby? The baby will grow up on the largest cattle ranch in the territory, with parents who built something extraordinary through hard work and smart decisions," Martha said firmly. "I can think of worse legacies to leave a child." Cole was quiet for several minutes, his arm around Martha as they watched the first stars appear in the darkening sky. "You know," he said finally, "a year ago, I was a drifter with $15 and a tired horse. Now I'm married to the most remarkable woman in Montana, about to become a father and being offered the chance to build a cattle empire." "Having second thoughts about that marriage proposal?" Martha teased. "Only about my sanity when I made it," Cole laughed. "What kind of man proposes to a woman he's known for 3 hours?" "The kind of man who recognizes something worth fighting for when he sees it," Martha replied. "The same kind of man who'll make this expansion work despite all the risks involved." The next morning, they rode out to the main house to give Henderson their answer. Rebecca was in the kitchen preparing breakfast when they arrived, and her face lit up when she saw them. "You look like people who've made a decision," she observed, pouring coffee without being asked. "We have," Martha said, accepting the cup gratefully. "We'd like to accept your husband's proposal, with a few modifications to the partnership terms." Henderson appeared from his office, clearly having heard their arrival. "Modifications?" Martha pulled out a sheet of paper covered with her neat handwriting. "We've been thinking about the timeline and financial structure. Instead of a 60-40 split for 5 years, what if we started with a 50-50 partnership, but with you retaining decision-making authority for the first 3 years? "Go on," Henderson said, settling into his chair with interest. "It would give us equal investment risk and reward from the beginning," Cole explained. "But acknowledge your experience and connections during the critical expansion phase." "And after 3 years?" Rebecca asked. "After 3 years, assuming." We've met the growth targets. We transition to equal decision-making authority with an option for us to buy you out whenever you're ready to retire, Martha continued. It gives you more security in the short term, but also ensures we're fully committed to making the expansion succeed. Henderson studied the proposal, his expression thoughtful. You've really thought this through. We had a long night to consider. All the implications, Martha said, exchanging a meaningful glance with Cole. Speaking of implications, Cole added, there's something else you should know before you agree to partner with us. Martha's expecting our first child. Rebecca's face broke into a delighted smile. Oh, how wonderful! When? Late spring, Martha replied. Which means I'll be managing the expansion's financial aspects while also preparing for motherhood. If anyone can handle both, Henderson said with conviction, it's you. Rebecca managed 3 pregnancies while helping me build this ranch from nothing. That settles it then, Rebecca declared. We accept your terms, and I insist on helping with the baby preparations. It's been too long since this house had children's laughter in it. Over the following weeks, the expansion plans took shape with remarkable speed. Henderson's brother arrived from Denver to finalize the market agreements, bringing contracts that guaranteed purchase prices for the next 5 years. Martha coordinated with banks in Billings and Denver to secure the necessary loans, using her established business relationships and the store's financial history as collateral. Cole threw himself into the practical aspects of expansion, identifying additional land for purchase, designing new facilities, and recruiting experienced hands for the larger operation. His reputation in the territory had grown considerably during his year as Henderson's foreman, and several top-quality cowboys applied for positions based on his recommendation alone. The transformation of their operation was dramatic. Within 6 months, they'd acquired an additional 10,000 acres, built new bunkhouses and corrals, and increased their herd size by 40%. Martha's pregnancy progressed smoothly, though she had to adjust her daily routine as her condition became more apparent. You realize, Cole said one evening as they reviewed expansion progress reports, we're actually pulling this off. Martha looked up from the financial projections spread across their kitchen table. Did you doubt we would? Honestly, sometimes. The scale of what we've undertaken is enormous, but watching you negotiate with bankers while 6 months pregnant, managing construction timelines while planning nursery furniture, it's remarkable. We make a good team, Martha agreed, placing his hand on her growing belly. And soon we'll have a very small partner to help us. As if responding to his father's touch, the baby kicked strongly enough that Cole felt it through Martha's dress. His face lit up with wonder that never seemed to diminish, no matter how often he felt the movement. Strong, he observed approvingly, takes after his mother. Or her father, Martha countered. Either way, this child is going to grow up understanding that anything is possible if you're willing to work for it. Cole leaned back in his chair, surveying the evidence of their success spread across the table. Contracts, financial reports, construction plans, and correspondence from cattle buyers across 3 territories. Martha, he said softly, do you ever think about that morning in the church? When did Harrison left you at the altar? Martha considered the question, her hand unconsciously moving to her belly. Sometimes, but not with regret, with gratitude. Gratitude. If Harrison had been the man I thought he was, if he'd gone through with the wedding, I'd be living a safe, predictable life as a railroad executive's wife. I'd probably be content, but I'd never have known what it felt like to build something extraordinary with someone who sees me as an equal partner, rather than a convenient accessory. Cole reached across the table and took her free hand. Any regrets about the impractical cowboy you married instead? Martha smiled, thinking of everything they'd accomplished together in just over a year, the successful ranch operation, the thriving store, the expansion that was already exceeding projections, and the child who would inherit a legacy built on love and determination rather than mere financial security. "Not a single one," she said firmly, "though I do sometimes wonder what the people of Cedar Falls think about how our story turned out." "Probably that we were either very lucky or very smart," Cole replied. "Or," Martha suggested, "that sometimes the most practical thing you can do is follow your heart instead of your head." As winter settled over their expanded ranch operation, Martha and Cole Brennan settled into the rhythm of building something that would last for generations. Their story had become legendary in 3 counties. The tale of the widow who was left at the altar only to marry a broke cowboy and build one of the most successful cattle operations in the territory. But for Martha and Cole, it wasn't a story at all. It was simply their life, impractical, adventurous, and absolutely perfect. 2 years had passed since Martha and Cole's dramatic wedding, and the spring roundup of 1955 found them overseeing the largest cattle operation in Montana Territory. Martha stood at the window of their expanded ranch house, watching Cole work with their prize breeding bull in the corral, while their 18-month-old daughter Hope played at her feet with wooden blocks that Cole had carved during the long winter evenings. The success of their expansion had exceeded everyone's expectations, including their own. What had started as Henderson's ambitious vision had evolved into something approaching a cattle empire, with operations spanning 4 counties and supply contracts reaching as far as Chicago and San Francisco. "Mama, Papa," Hope called out, pointing toward the window where Cole was visible. At 18 months, she was already showing signs of inheriting both parents' determination and intelligence. "Yes, sweetheart, that's Papa," Martha said, scooping up her daughter. "Shall we go see what he's doing?" The transformation of their lives still amazed Martha sometimes. The woman who had been left at the altar had become one of the most influential ranchers in the territory, consulted by bankers and cattle buyers from across the West. But it was the smaller transformations that meant the most, the way Cole's face lit up every time he saw Hope, the easy partnership they'd developed in both business and parenting, the quiet contentment that came from building something meaningful together. As they walked toward the corral, Martha spotted a familiar figure riding up the main drive. Dr. Crawford's visits had become more frequent since Hope's birth, though today his purpose seemed to be social rather than medical. "Good morning, Mrs. Brennan," he called out, dismounting, with the stiffness of a man whose bones were feeling their years. "Beautiful day for checking on the territory's most successful ranching family." "Dr. Crawford," Martha smiled, "you're just in time for coffee. Rebecca made her famous cinnamon rolls this morning." Hope immediately reached for the elderly doctor, who had delivered her and maintained a grandfatherly interest in her development. "Oh, well, hello there, little miss. Growing like a weed, I see." Cole approached from the corral, removing his work gloves and grinning at their visitor. "Doc, what brings you out our way? Everything is all right in town?" Dr. Crawford's expression grew more serious. "Actually, there's something I wanted to discuss with both of you, news from back east that might interest you." They settled on the front porch while Hope played with her blocks in the sunshine. Rebecca Henderson emerged from the main house. She and Jacob had converted the upper floor into their private quarters, while Martha and Cole's family occupied the expanded lower level, carrying a tray of coffee and fresh rolls. "Now then, Doctor," Crawford began once they were all settled, "I received a letter from a colleague in Boston yesterday. He's involved with a new organization called the National Cattlemen's Association, and they're looking for successful ranchers to help establish standards and practices for the industry." Martha's interest was immediately piqued. What kind of standards? Breeding practices, feed management, transportation protocols, essentially creating a framework that would help smaller ranchers adopt the techniques that have made operations like yours so successful. Cole leaned forward, Sounds like they want to share trade secrets. In a sense, yes, Dr. Crawford acknowledged. But the thinking is that improving the overall quality of cattle across the country benefits everyone. Better beef means higher prices and more reliable markets. Martha could see the broader implications immediately. They want to organize the industry, create consistency and quality standards that would strengthen the entire market. Exactly. And they specifically asked about your operation. Word has spread about what you've accomplished here, and they'd like one of you to come to Boston for their inaugural meeting. Rebecca Henderson had been listening quietly, but now she spoke up. That would be quite an honor, and quite an opportunity to influence the future of ranching. Martha looked at Cole, recognizing the excitement in his eyes despite his attempt to appear cautious. This was exactly the kind of challenge that appealed to both of them, the chance to take what they'd learned and apply it on a national scale. When would this meeting take place? Cole asked. October. They're planning a week-long conference, with ranchers from across the country, plus representatives from railroads, banks, and meatpacking companies. A week in Boston, Martha mused. That's quite a journey from Montana. Hope toddled over to her mother, babbling something that sounded like "Mama, go," with the uncanny intuition that children sometimes displayed. "Not go, sweetheart," Martha said, lifting her daughter. "Just thinking about something." But as she said it, Martha realized she was indeed thinking about going. The opportunity to help shape the future of an industry they'd invested their lives in was too significant to ignore. "Doc," Cole said slowly, "did they say whether they wanted both of us or just one?" Dr. Crawford smiled. "They were very specific about wanting the Brennan team. Apparently, your reputation as partners has reached the East Coast." Martha felt a familiar thrill at being recognized as an equal partner, rather than simply the wife of a successful rancher. It was the same feeling she'd experienced when Henderson had first offered them the expansion opportunity. "We'd need to make arrangements for Hope," she said, thinking aloud, "and the ranch couldn't run itself for a week." "Nonsense," Rebecca interjected. "Jacob and I managed this place for 30 years before you came along. We can certainly handle a week while you two make us all proud in Boston." Over the following weeks, the idea of the Boston trip grew from possibility to probability to definite plan. Martha threw herself into preparing materials that would showcase their operations' innovations: detailed financial records, breeding, documentation, and photographic evidence of their facilities. Cole focused on ensuring the ranch would run smoothly in their absence, though Martha suspected he was also researching eastern cattle markets and transportation networks. His excitement about the conference was becoming more apparent daily. "You know," Martha said one evening as they reviewed their presentation materials, 3 years ago, I thought the height of adventure would be moving to a ranch 20 miles from town. "And now?" Cole prompted. "Now we're preparing to travel 2,000 miles to help reshape an entire industry." Martha shook her head in wonder. "Sometimes I think that Cowboy I married has infected me with his taste for impossible challenges." "Is that a complaint?" Martha looked around their comfortable home, at Hope sleeping peacefully in her crib, at the financial reports showing profits that exceeded their wildest projections, at the photographs documenting the transformation of their operation from Henderson's modest ranch to their current empire. "Definitely not a complaint," she said firmly. "More of a celebration." The journey to Boston was itself an adventure. Martha had never traveled farther east than Denver, and the changing landscape visible from the train windows fascinated her. Cole spent much of the trip sketching ideas for ranch improvements inspired by farming techniques they observed along the way. Hope adapted to train travel with the resilience of youth, charming fellow passengers, and keeping her parents entertained with her running commentary on everything she saw. By the time they reached Boston, Martha felt like they'd completed a successful trial run for future family adventures. The conference exceeded their expectations in every way. The other ranches were impressive, successful operators from Texas, California, Colorado, and points between. But Martha quickly realized that their Montana operation was among the most innovative and profitable. More importantly, the discussions revealed opportunities they hadn't previously considered. Railroad representatives talked about expanding western routes that could provide access to new markets. Banking officials discussed investment strategies that could fund even larger expansions. "Mrs. Brennan," said Charles Morrison, a prominent Boston banker during a reception on their third evening, "your operation's financial model is remarkable. Have you considered franchising your management approach to other ranches?" Martha nearly choked on her wine. Franchising? Providing consultation services to ranchers who want to adopt your methods but lack the expertise to implement them independently. You could charge fees for your knowledge while helping improve the industry overall. The idea was intriguing. Martha had already been informally advising other ranchers in Montana, but she'd never considered it as a formal business opportunity. Cole appeared at her elbow, having overheard the conversation. "That's an interesting thought, Mr. Morrison. What kind of structure were you envisioning?" "Partnership agreements, similar to what you have with the Hendersons, but on a consulting basis. You'd provide expertise and oversight in exchange for a percentage of improved profits." That night, Martha and Cole walked through Boston's gaslit streets, discussing possibilities that seemed to expand with every block they covered. "We could help dozens of ranchers improve their operations," Martha said excitedly. "Create a network of efficient, profitable ranches across the West. And build a business that's not dependent on cattle prices or weather patterns," Cole added. "Diversify our income while helping the industry grow." "Are we seriously considering this?" Cole stopped walking and turned to face her. "Martha, 2.5 years ago, you accepted a marriage proposal from a man you'd known for 3 hours. Are you really surprised that we're considering another impossible opportunity?" Martha laughed, realizing he was absolutely right. "When you put it that way, it sounds perfectly reasonable. Besides," Cole continued, "Hope is going to inherit our ranch someday. Wouldn't it be nice if she also inherited a business that could influence ranching across the entire country?" As they returned to their hotel, Martha felt the familiar excitement that came with recognizing a truly significant opportunity. The Boston conference had opened doors they'd never imagined, and the thought of walking through them together filled her with anticipation. 3 years ago, she'd been a practical widow, planning a sensible marriage to a reliable man. Now she was an influential rancher married to her best friend, raising a daughter who would inherit opportunities beyond anything Martha could have dreamed. "Cole," she said as they climbed the hotel stairs, "remind me to send Harrison Blackwood a thank you letter when we get home for abandoning you at the altar, for forcing me to discover what was possible when I stopped playing it safe." Cole's smile was the same one that had convinced her to marry him in Murphy's Cafe, full of love and mischief and absolute certainty that their best adventures were still ahead of them. 5 years after that life-changing October morning in Chius, 1952, Martha Brennan stood on the platform of the Cedar Falls train station, watching as the newest rail line extension brought prosperity and growth to the town that had witnessed her greatest humiliation and most unexpected triumph. The woman who had once been left at the altar was now returning home as one of the most influential figures in Western agriculture. But today's visit had nothing to do with business. The Brennan Ranching Consortium had become a reality beyond even their boldest dreams. What had started with the Henderson Ranch had evolved into a network of 15 affiliated operations across 4 states, all following the management principles Martha and Cole had developed. Their consulting business had revolutionized ranching. Practices throughout the West, while their original Montana operation remained the flagship that demonstrated what was possible when innovation met determination. "Mama, is that where you and Papa got married?" asked Hope, now a precocious 4-year-old with her father's storm-grey eyes and her mother's sharp intelligence. She was pointing toward the Methodist church, whose bell tower was visible above the town's roofline. "Yes, sweetheart," Martha replied, lifting her daughter to get a better view. "That's where Papa asked me to marry him. And I said yes, even though everyone thought we were crazy." "Were you crazy?" Hope asked, with the directness that consistently amazed her parents. Cole laughed, approaching from where he'd been supervising the unloading of their luggage. "Completely crazy," he confirmed, "and it was the smartest thing we ever did." The transformation of Cedar Falls was immediately apparent as they walked through town. New businesses lined the main street, the railroad depot bustled with activity, and prosperity was evident in the freshly painted buildings and well-maintained roads. Their own success had played no small part in the town's growth. The General store that Martha still owned had become the anchor for a thriving commercial district. "Martha, Cole!" Sarah Murphy waved from the doorway of what was now Murphy's Mercantile, the expanded store that had grown from Martha's original general store into the largest retail establishment between Billings and Great Falls. "You're just in time for the dedication ceremony." The dedication ceremony was the reason for their visit. Cedar Falls was unveiling a new community center funded partly by donations from the Brennan Ranching Consortium and other successful businesses that had grown from the town's humble beginnings. But for Martha, the real purpose of the trip was more personal. As they settled into their hotel rooms, the same establishment where Harrison Blackwood had once stayed, Martha reflected on how completely her life had changed. The scared, humiliated woman who had been abandoned at the altar had become someone she barely recognized, confident, successful, and surrounded by love that grew stronger with each passing year. Mrs. Brennan, the hotel clerk, a young man Martha didn't recognize, approached hesitantly. "There's a gentleman asking to speak with you. Says it's regarding old business." Martha's stomach tightened slightly. "Did he give his name?" "Harrison Blackwood, ma'am. He's waiting in the lobby." Cole appeared instantly at Martha's side, his protective instincts as strong as ever. "You don't have to see him." "I know," Martha said, surprising herself with how calm she felt. "But I think I want to." Harrison Blackwood looked older than his years, Martha noticed as she descended the hotel stairs. His expensive suit couldn't hide the weight he'd gained or the lines that spoke of stress and disappointment, rather than laughter. He rose nervously as she approached, his hat clutched in hands that trembled slightly. "Martha," he said, his voice carrying a mix of regret and desperation. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." "Mr. Blackwood," she replied formally, deliberately choosing to use his surname rather than the first name that had once seemed so intimate. "What brings you to Cedar Falls?" Harrison glanced around the busy lobby, clearly uncomfortable with the public setting. "I was hoping we might speak privately about what happened between us." Martha considered the request, then nodded toward the hotel restaurant. "We can talk over coffee, publicly." As they settled into a corner table, Martha found herself studying this man who had once represented everything she thought she wanted. The confident railroad executive had been replaced by someone who seemed diminished, uncertain, and profoundly unhappy. "I suppose you've heard about my circumstances?" Harrison began, stirring his coffee with unnecessary vigor. "I hear very little gossip about people who are no longer part of my life," Martha replied truthfully. "Should I have heard something specific?" Harrison's face reddened. "My marriage. It ended 2 years ago. The railroad ventures failed, and without her father's financial backing," he trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "I'm sorry to hear about your difficulties," Martha said, and was surprised to find she genuinely meant it. "But I'm not sure why you're telling me this." "Because I was wrong," Harrison said desperately. Wrong about everything. Wrong to leave you at the altar. Wrong to marry for money instead of love. Wrong to think that security mattered more than happiness. Martha sipped her coffee, waiting for him to continue. She felt no anger, no vindication, and surprisingly, no satisfaction at his obvious misery. Instead, she felt only pity for a man who had made choices based on fear rather than hope. I've been following your success in the newspapers, Harrison continued. The ranching consortium, the consulting business, the way you and your husband have built something extraordinary together. It should have been us, Martha. It could have been us. No, Martha said quietly but firmly. It couldn't have been us. Harrison looked stricken. But if I hadn't panicked about the financial situation, Harrison, Martha interrupted, the financial situation was just an excuse. The real problem was that you saw me as a solution to your problems rather than a partner in building something. No, that's not true. It is true, Martha continued, her voice gentle but unwavering. You chose me because I was safe, stable, and financially secure. When your own security was threatened, you ran because you never saw our relationship as something worth fighting for together. Harrison's shoulders sagged as the accuracy of her assessment hit home. And your husband? Cole? He saw something different? Martha thought about Cole, probably upstairs reading Hope a bedtime story with the patient attention that characterized everything he did with their daughter. Cole saw possibilities instead of problems. He saw partnership instead of convenience. He chose love even when it didn't make practical sense, and you were right to choose him over me. I didn't choose him over you, Martha corrected. I chose hope over fear. I chose building something together over settling for what seemed safe. Cole just happened to be the man brave enough to offer me that choice. Harrison was quiet for a long moment, absorbing the finality in her words. I suppose there's no chance. None, Martha said firmly. Even if I weren't completely happy. With my life, which I am, you and I had our opportunity. You walked away from it and I found something better. Better, Harrison repeated bitterly. A drifter with no money and no prospects. Martha's eyes flashed with the first hint of real anger. That drifter built an empire with me. That man with no prospects became one of the most respected ranchers in the West. And the love he offered with nothing but hope behind it has given me more happiness than your security and respectability ever could have. She stood, preparing to leave, but something in Harrison's defeated posture made her pause. Harrison, I hope you find what you're looking for. But you won't find it by trying to reclaim something that was never really there to begin with. As Martha returned to her hotel room, she found Cole sitting by the window, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, while Hope slept peacefully in the adjoining bed. How did it go? He asked, pulling her into his arms. Exactly as it needed to, Martha replied, settling against his chest. He's still the same man who ran away instead of facing problems together. I'm grateful he reminded me of that. Any regrets? About the path not taken. Martha looked around their hotel suite, far more luxurious than anything Harrison could have provided during his brief period of prosperity. Then at their sleeping daughter, and finally at the man who had transformed her life by offering her a choice she'd never imagined possible. The only path not taken that I regret, she said, is not meeting you sooner. The next morning's dedication ceremony drew hundreds of people from across the county. Martha and Cole were recognized as major contributors to the community center. But the real highlight came when the mayor announced the establishment of the Martha Brennan Scholarship Fund for young women pursuing business education. Mrs. Brennan, the mayor said as the crowd applauded, has shown our community and our nation that women can be equal partners in building the economic future of the West. This scholarship will help other young women follow her example. As Martha stood to acknowledge the honor, she caught sight of Eleanor Fitzgerald in the crowd. now elderly, but still sharp-eyed. The woman who had once gossiped about Martha's unconventional choices was applauding enthusiastically, her expression showing genuine pride in what the scandalous young widow had accomplished. Later, as they prepared to board the train back to their ranch, Martha reflected on how completely her life had been transformed by a single morning's disaster. The woman who had been left at the altar had become someone she could never have imagined, a successful businesswoman, a loving wife, a devoted mother, and a leader in an industry that had once seemed entirely foreign to her. Any final thoughts? "About Cedar Falls?" Cole asked as the train pulled away from the station. Martha watched the town disappear behind them, thinking about the church where they'd been married, the cafe where Cole had first proposed, and the hotel where Harrison had just learned that some chances, once lost, could never be reclaimed. "Just gratitude," she said finally, "for everything that went wrong in exactly the right way." Hope, who had been napping on Martha's lap, stirred and opened her eyes. "Are we going home now, Mama?" "Yes, sweetheart," Martha replied, smoothing her daughter's hair. "We're going home to our ranch where Papa and I built something wonderful together. Will you tell me the story again, about how Papa saved you from the mean man?" Cole laughed. "Hope, your father didn't save me from anyone. We saved each other." As the train carried them west toward Montana, toward their ranch and their businesses and their future, Martha Brennan marveled at the journey that had brought her from disaster to triumph. She had learned that sometimes the worst thing that could happen to you was actually the best thing if you were brave enough to see opportunity in the wreckage of your carefully laid plans. The widow who had been left at the altar had found something far more valuable than the security she'd originally sought. She had found partnership, adventure, success, and love that grew stronger with each challenge they faced together, and as the train rounded a curve and the lights of their home ranch came into view in the distance, Martha knew that their greatest adventures were still ahead of them. After all, they were Martha and Cole Brennan, the couple who had turned a wedding day disaster into a love story that would be told for generations to come. The broke cowboy who'd had nothing but love to offer had given her everything she'd never known she wanted, and the practical widow who'd been planning a sensible marriage had discovered that the most sensible thing she could do was follow her heart into the unknown. Their story had become legend in 3 states, but for Martha and Cole, it wasn't a story at all. It was simply their life, impractical, adventurous, and absolutely perfect. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.